Well, thanks for having me. My name is Mia TRAMZ. I'm the managing editor of Life VR. And I'm going to talk to you today about the brand we just launched and kind of approach it as a case study. I know many of you are trying to figure out in what way to enter into this space, and hopefully some of the decisions we made will be informative to that end. I like to start these things off with an audience poll, just so I don't end up inadvertently mansplaining certain things that you already know a lot about. So I'm curious, who here has watched VR on a cardboard headset? Everybody, awesome. Who's used a Samsung Gear? Everybody, you guys are amazing. Who's used an Oculus headset and an HTC Vive? Okay, so you all know what you're talking about. I'm not gonna have to explain much to you. I will have a couple slides in here that are really to break down some terminology that other people might not be so familiar with, but I won't spend too much time on them so we don't go over stuff that you guys are already experts in. So, just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've been at Time Magazine for 3.5 years. I started as a photo editor. About 2 years ago, got into immersive storytelling and produced Time's first underwater 360 video with Fabien Cousteau. He's Jacques' grandson. At the time, it took me about 5 months to get this project approved. And when they finally gave me the green light, I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this. So I went out and I was like, there's gotta be one underwater rig for shooting 360. And at that time, surprisingly, there wasn't very much available. I found actually the only one that had been pressure tested by 360 Heroes. They had a demo rig. We shot a lap around Aquarius, which is a underwater lab off the Florida Keys. And you got to go on a dive with Fabien's scientists and see him drinking coffee through one of the portholes of this crazy looking underwater lab. You get to see where NASA trains their astronauts underwater. And it was kind of my first taste of 360 storytelling, and I've been hooked ever since. Fast forward to this year, Time Inc. announced that we would be launching Life VR, which we just went live with on September 20th. I was brought on as the managing editor, so my role in this project has been to develop and produce virtual reality content for all of our brands. So that includes these plus many others. Some of the ones you might be most familiar with are Time, Sports Illustrated, People, Entertainment Weekly, Travel and Leisure, Food and Wine, and many, many more. We launched as a multi-platform virtual reality brand, which means that we are publishing to many different platforms and creating content for many different headsets. We have a dedicated mobile app, which you can download for iOS and Android. Please do, I highly recommend it. And we launched with 3 pieces of content, which I'll talk a little bit about. So I think it's interesting to explain why we created an umbrella brand instead of creating VR apps or content discretely for each of the brands. Certain of our brands very early on were getting into VR, SI, and InStyle, were some of the first to create their own VR pieces. And at that time, we were faced with, okay, we could create mobile apps for each of these brands, or we could look at, the wide audience of Time Inc. collectively. We have 165 million digital viewers per month, and we have a social footprint of over 200 million friends and followers. So the idea with Life VR is to harness the power of that audience. And when we launch pieces, we launch them across all of our networks. So, we get each of the brands behind Life VR content, and that drives viewership back to the different platforms where we're publishing, and it's proven to be quite powerful early on. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the pieces that we've launched with, and then some of the pieces that we have coming. 2 of the 3 pieces that we launched with are 360 video. This is just a really short breakdown of what 360 video is and can be. this initiative is being spun up in parallel with a 360 video initiative within Time Inc., but the two pieces we launched with were created with outside production partners. One of the first and most exciting pieces that we launched with was for Time. It was a companion piece to a Ken Burns film that premiered on PBS the same day that we launched the app. The documentary was called Defying the Nazis. We share a title with the VR companion piece. And the documentary itself is about an American couple named the Sharps that went to Europe at the start of World War II. And they were personally responsible for saving hundreds of people that were fleeing Nazi occupation. So in our VR piece that was directed by Elijah Allen Blitz and produced by VR Playhouse, we recreated one of these rescue missions where Martha Sharp, the wife of the couple, took a boatload, literal boatload of children from Europe to New York and brought them to safety. And in our piece, you get to hear the actual survivors telling what that day was like, how it changed their life. And, it was an interesting way for us to provide some commentary on what is happening currently with the current refugee crisis. It was an interesting way in for us as a news organization to do VR. And, it kind of set us apart from our competitive set in a few ways, where we weren't doing documentary video per se, but we were still contributing to the conversation of what is happening and what is newsworthy. So I'm gonna show you a video that we created of one of the survivors of this actual mission watching the piece in VR and what her reaction was. And then, if you were interested to watch the full piece, you can certainly watch it on our app. It's an incredibly powerful piece. Elijah, who's sitting right there, our director, and VR Playhouse did some really beautiful work on it. And, I think it also speaks to something that I was very cognizant of in bringing the Life brand back to life and working with titles like Time, which is that, we wanted to enter into the market with something meaningful. We didn't want to just do VR for VR's sake. And we have these brands that have a legacy and a history, and God, I can't let that go to waste. So partnering with Ken Burns and finding a story that was that emotional and resonates in the current day was really important for us in terms of the editorial vision of the brand that we're building. So we're also very much creating real-time rendered experiences, and I'm very interested in keeping a good portion of our programming in that space. It's certainly a challenge in terms of viewership right now, but I'll speak a little bit more to how we're thinking about distribution, and it also gives the content that we're making a little bit of longevity as the technology continues to evolve. So these are, three of many categories of real-time rendered experiences that your content can fall into. We've delved into two of these three. We have some narrative storytelling pieces coming out in the next few months that will be room scale. And we launched with a utility-driven piece, which I'll talk a little bit more briefly in a second. But we have one project that we announced this week with 8i, where we are creating messages that are meant for the future Mars astronauts. So 8i was approached by an R&D company working for NASA named SIFT, and they're studying the effects of isolation for these future Mars astronauts who will be on a rocket ship for quite a long time without any access to their friends or family. So they were curious to see if they were delivered messages in VR, how would that affect the psychological effects of isolation for these people? So for the last 12 months, there's been 6 scientists living in a hab in Hawaii and unable to leave the hab unless they're in a spacesuit. It's a really fascinating project. I highly recommend looking at pictures coming out of there. They're really entertaining. So they asked 8i to create some VR holograms to deliver to these scientists so that the effects could be studied, and perhaps one day these will make it onto a spaceship with some real astronauts heading to the red planet. But for now, our partnership with 8i is to help them bring some interesting and historical personalities to this project. It seemed like an incredible opportunity for us to create sort of a time capsule of luminaries that are related to space exploration and human endeavor today. So our first piece is with, you can see up here, with Buzz. We created a VR hologram of him about 2 months ago. I got to meet him, which was, as a huge space nerd, a lifelong dream. And you can see a work in progress of this piece on Soundstage 4. We'll be releasing the full piece in early next year, and it'll be the first in a series that will be ongoing with 8i as we, create this collection of historical and inspirational messages. This is also a moment to kind of talk about the intersection between VR and AR. I'm sure a lot of you are, if you're not already exploring AR, thinking about, should I explore AR? I think it's definitely worth thinking about how some of the assets you're creating for VR can translate into AR. And in this case, the translation is kind of a no-brainer. We can take these VR holograms and use them in AR in a bunch of really interesting and hilarious ways. So we're looking forward to exploring that with this project and with future projects. So I'll just very quickly touch on distribution. I think it's interesting to think about right now the different ways that you could reach your audiences. Certainly we can publish to our dedicated mobile app, we can publish to the Oculus platform, we can publish to Viveport and Steam, and to Samsung Gear. But there's still quite a limited but growing viewership on those platforms. So one of my kind of dreams for this brand, and something that we're just starting to realize, is taking the content we're making back into public-facing spaces. So, I think when you create a piece, thinking about a real-world context that you could place it back into and give it an added layer of meaning really starts to become interesting. So there are certain projects that we're looking at that we would install in museums, certain projects that we would install in events that are both internal and external for Time Inc. I think one of the exciting things right now is to show people VR for the first time, so that gives us an opportunity to do that and to do it within a context that adds value to the experience. We're also very interested, of course, in location-based VR distribution. So you have probably seen Awesome Rocket Ship out in front. It's certainly worth becoming familiar with those burgeoning distribution models. It's an added source of possible revenue, which is a thing that we're all trying to figure out right now. And, I think there's going to be a lot of different versions of that coming out in the next year. So I think that brings kind of like the shared experience back to VR, something that makes it more of a piece of entertainment in the sense of a theme park ride versus something that you enjoy at home. So I'll very briefly also touch on VR as a tool or something that has inherent utility. One of our launch pieces was called Lumen. It was created in collaboration with Framestore, and they did some incredible work on it. We also had Dr. Walter Greenleaf from Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab as an advisor, and he helped us bake some neuroscience into the design. It's a nonlinear experience that helps to de-stress you in about 5 minutes. And when I started thinking about, what are the different ways that we could get into VR and contribute something meaningful, I really was fascinated in delivering something to our readers that would help them better their lives. Certainly our brands are known for delivering news and entertainment, but we've also historically given you tools to lead a better life. And this certainly speaks to that. It's, every time I describe this, it sounds like I dropped acid before I came up with this idea. So I created a storyboard that basically, put you into some sort of a magical forest. And I gave that to Framestore, and they sort of ran with it. So what we've ended up with is an experience where you enter into a bioluminescent forest, and then using headset gaze, you are able to control the life cycle of the forest around you. And it really makes you focus and kind of slow down, and the way that the trees grow around you is, kind of meditative and slow. And then there's a few other points of interaction that you can have throughout the experience. We have an aurora in the sky that when you focus on it, it changes the color of the environment around you. And we did this because, what is a relaxing color to me may not be a relaxing color to another person. Certainly, across cultures that varies. So you get to pick the color that's most soothing to you. We're going to continue to develop this and work on it with a few different doctors at Stanford. I think this is just the beginning of something that will continue to evolve, and as we get more data on it, we will certainly react to that data. I think that's a really interesting part about this type of VR is that it isn't something that you put out into the world that then never changes. It can live and breathe and become better with time. So I'll just show you a really quick little clip that gives you a taste of what the world of Lumen is like. If you could play the next video. And what's interesting there is it was created for the Vive, but we also have a cardboard version that's quite good, so you can try that out in our app as well. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is formats that we're trying. So as Jelena mentioned in the panel two before mine, I think it is really important to try to break some of these rules that have been instated really early on in content creation. One of them has been, how long should these experiences be? And most of what we're publishing will be between 3 to 5 minutes, but certainly I think we're going to try to push that. And I think the way that I've tried to go about that in terms of the methodology is, does the content, does it merit the extra length? Does it merit spending extra time with that experience? And certainly I think some of these projects do. So we announced this also this week. We have a project coming in the first quarter of next year. It's called Capturing Everest. It's the first bottom to top climb of Mount Everest in VR. It's 360 video. And we are releasing it through Sports Illustrated. It's a partnership with Endemol Shine Beyond. And it'll be released as a 6 to 7 part series, and each of the episodes will be between 7 to 15 minutes long. So it's an experiment in a kind of longer format storytelling and a serialized format of storytelling. It's an interesting package in terms of sponsorship. We've had to kind of rethink our sales strategy when it comes to VR, and it's such a new product. How do you offer it to a sponsor in a compelling way? So with this particular project, we will be featuring it as a flip cover for Sports Illustrated's magazine. There'll be a spread in the magazine as well. We'll be creating an interactive hub around the experience on si.com that includes both 360 and 2D video. And then, of course, we'll be releasing it through LifeVR's channels. So I'll have them roll the video in just a second. To give you some context, we had a group of 6 climbers. The series will focus on 4 of them. We have one of the guide of the team has climbed Everest more than any other American. He's led 37 people up to the summit. We have a climber with 1 leg who made it to the top. His climbing leg was made by NASA. We have another climber who is a cancer survivor. She survived cancer and then decided to sell her house and quit her job to do this climb. And then we have another gentleman who promised his father when he was quite young that he would climb Everest. And as his father died when he was quite young, this is him fulfilling his promise to his dad. So if we could roll the last clip.